Aditi ji, I would like to hand over to you with an important question. People have heard about love stories, they have heard about Hindu love stories, but its association with Dharma that seems to be interesting and yet unknown. So, would you please let us know what do you mean by Dharma here and how is it associated to our love stories? Yes, ma'am, please.
Namaste. Thank you for having me here. And that's a wonderful question. And I will start the talk with that. So I think there is a very good way of encapsulating what exactly we mean by associating love with dharma. And when we think about love, we should also be careful about that term. Like that's right now you can say, I love coffee, I love this, I love that. But what we mean about this kind of romantic sense of love, where you have this desire and this caring for someone else. So in that sense. So there is this tradition called the Kashi Yatra Prayoga, which is this wedding tradition that happens across many regions of India. And in this tradition, what happens is before the marriage ceremony starts, the groom will actually dress up and get prepared to go on yatra or to travel to Kashi. And Kashi here represents, it is the holy city. It is where Hindus go not to die, but they want to die there because the city, it's one of the 7 cities that grants moksha. It is a city of scholarship, of learning, of renunciation. So that's what Kashi kind of loftily represents. So it represents, in a sense, moksha. And so the young man is embarking on his journey. He starts on the path. He starts walking towards Kashi. And then his prospective father-in-law comes and says, and grabs him by the hand and says, stop. And he says, you are going to Kashi. That's a wonderful thing. That's a laudable thing. That's the destination for all of us. But let me offer to you that along the way, my daughter can be a companion to you, can be a partner to you, and together you can proceed to Kashi. So through grihastha, through this householder life, through marriage and family, you'd also be fulfilling dharma, and she will help you on your way. So, and then the groom either agrees or does not agree. And then from there, the wedding ceremony begins. So nowadays, a lot of times this is not understood in its proper spirit. And it's treated as either like a superstition or a joke. And people just laugh about it like it's a game. But there's a very deep meaning and ethos to this, which is when you're about to embark on this life, a family life, a life that is in the world and in pravritti, that your reminder is that the ultimate destination is moksha. The ultimate destination is Shiva and learning and this life leading towards moksha. And you're orienting yourself that may this marriage, may this union, may this family help us achieve moksha through the path of dharma. And so the couple is being oriented that way from the beginning. And the kind of vrittis and the vibrations that are said at this time are very important. So this kind of exemplifies the Purushartha framework, which is that for every human being, the 4 principal aims of life are first and foremost dharma, then artha, which is the pursuit of wealth according to dharmic means, kama, the pursuit of enjoyment within dharmic means, and then and of course moksha, which is the ultimate aim. And so within this framework, why that is helpful is you have the space, and it is healthy to pursue kama or enjoyment of married life or of romantic life, but you're always being bookended by dharma and moksha. And that is very important because that is where when we say like Western romance is problematic, it's not like a moralistic judgment. It's not like being prudish or something like that. There's always been a very healthy acceptance of romance and sexuality in our itihas and Puranas. In fact, if you read them, there are very long descriptions of the beautiful forms of devis and different female characters and of their times in their forest. If you read the Ramayana, there's beautiful descriptions of Sri Rama and Sita's time together in the forest and how much they cared for each other, how much Sri Rama cared for Sita, how tender he was towards her. And those things are accepted healthily without any kind of censorship or judgment. But what happens in the West is that this is taken to an extreme where romance is seen as an end unto itself because it's a very individualistic vision. And this vision is that you are always looking for happiness, and therefore you're always looking for a kind of like joy and high from being in a romantic relationship that is never sustainable. And so what happens is you get to happily ever after, but no one talks about what happens the day after that or the year after that, when the vicissitudes of life come in and it's not enough. And what also happens is people who have a lot of psychological issues because there's low self-esteem or they have depression or things like that, they look for love as an escape or almost like as a drug to get away from their everyday life. And that always fails. And so you have a very dysfunctional system that comes out of Western love stories and this kinds of expectations that are set. So the kind of expectations that are set are that you have to prove your love. So you prove your love by sacrificing other things, by, like if a family disapproves of your significant other, you're going to break apart from your family or things like that. And so it becomes a test that you have to prove and you have to prove your love by doing all these other things. So an example of that can be, one of the most romantic episodes in history is considered to be when Edward abdicated the throne as King of England to marry an American divorcee, Wallis Simpson. So this idea that this man would give up the throne, give up the crown for his love was considered something very romantic. In actuality, if you read the story, he later wanted to come back and take the throne, and he kind of regretted that decision, but we leave that part out. Whereas in our case, we celebrate Sri Rama, who had to send Sita to the forest. And actually, if you read the passage in the Ramayana where this happens, it's told in a very moving way. The two of them are sitting together. She tells him that she's pregnant with his child. They're enjoying this time. It's said that they resembled Indra and Shachi, like that's how beautiful and happy they were. And then he hears that there's this concern among his subjects about Sita, and then he makes this very painful decision, and you can tell what a painful decision it is for him. And Sita also expressed that she misses being in the forest and in the ashrams, and that she would like to see, she would like to go back there again. And then he said, so that is how we've thought about love traditionally. That is something there, but sometimes it is always subsumed under dharma, and that you always have to do the dharmically right thing. And so you don't think of love as being something that I'm just guaranteed, or this is it's happiness or something like that. It is part of your sadhana and part of the path of going towards spiritual evolution and leading a dharmic life. And dharma in that sense is again something that's misunderstood. So what is dharma? Dharma is that which upholds the rhythm. And the rhythm is kind of the sense of order and balance and the good for all. So loka sangraha, so for everyone. And so when we say living dharmically, it doesn't mean that we're living in self-denial or something like that, but it's this concept of harmony. So what is the harmony for a couple, for a family, for the society as a whole? And that is what we are striving towards. And so you never think of kama or happiness as being the ultimate aim, because if you do that, that'll never be sustainable either for yourself or for society. And so it's finding a way of living with love sustainably, and celebrating that and honoring that, because kama is one of the four purushartha, and Kama Deva himself is a revered deva in our tradition. And there's actually another story that celebrates this very well, which is the story of Agastya and his wife Lopamudra. So Agastya is one of our most renowned rishis, and he's celebrated for his asceticism and his depth of attainment. And his wife is Lopamudra. And there's actually a Vedic hymn where Lopamudra kind of chides him and says, you've been spending so much time in renunciation and in your asceticism, and you're kind of neglecting me. And then he says he readily agrees to this, and he moves towards her. And then there's like a student observing like how beautiful this is, that Agastya Muni, who is so celebrated and renowned for his asceticism, also also cares for and is devoted to his wife too. So that's like a Vedic hymn. And then later in the Mahabharata and the Puranas, this becomes an entire story where Lopamudra, he approaches Lopamudra once after his time of penance, and she says, no, but I want to be decked beautifully. I want you to look nice. I want this to be like a romantic setting, and we should have all this, and not, it shouldn't just be like this. And Agastya Muni agrees to this, and he says, okay, I will go. I don't have the money for this, but let me go and find the wealth with which to adorn you and to make a beautiful place for us to be together. And he says, but the one thing is, I must do it. The money I take, it will not harm anyone else. And so there's a whole long story of how this happens in the Mahabharata, and it's recounted in this book. But the idea is there's this acceptance of both, that you have the path of asceticism that you have to and renunciation, but also you celebrate this grihastashrama, or this companionship, and in a very world-affirming way also, and finding the balance between the two. And that balance is really what is being referred to as Dharma. And so what I wanted to do was find stories, and there's so many stories out there, but I had to limit myself. So stories that show different aspects of this dynamic and of love. Okay, sure. So I thought what I would do is talk about some different themes in the stories in the book. And one of them was about misconceptions about Hindu women. And so it was very interesting to me. Is like I learned a lot while I was writing this book. And I've always known that Hindu women, Vedic women from the Puranas and the Itihasa are very strong, and they have wit, they have grit, and they're not the kind of meek, submissive stereotype that we're often presented with. But it was really interesting to find this even more so in the process of writing this book. So one example is the story of Savitri. And Savitri is depicted, like nowadays we're told Savitri was very, weak. She did all of this for her husband. So she was trying to save the life of her husband. And even that she tricked Yamadeva into restoring the life of her husband. But if you read the story of Savitri in the Mahabharata, it's much more nuanced than that. And you understand what a fascinating and powerful figure she was. So when Savitri came of age, her father said, "You are such a beautiful, intelligent, noble woman. I cannot even think of who would be a suitable husband for you." So he says, "Savitri, you go find the man that you want to marry, and I will arrange the marriage." So she had the agency of choice. And I think this is something very important when we talk about Dharma, that for Dharma to be valid. It has to be exercised by choice and by free will. It cannot be imposed or enforced, because if you take away a person's choice, then that is not them being able to pursue their purushartha, and it cannot be considered dharmic. So in any case, she goes out, and then she comes back after some time. She's gone out to the forest with the attendants. She's gone to different kingdoms, and she comes back and she says, I want to marry this Satyavan, and I want to marry him. And it so happens that at that time Narada Muni is there. And he says, oh, he's a wonderful man. He would be a wonderful choice, but you cannot marry him because he is fated to die in a year. And then the king says, oh, this is terrible. Savitri, go out and find someone else. And she says, no, I said that I want to marry him, and he's the one that I will marry. And so because this is her choice, then they respect it, and she marries, and she knows that this will happen. And then the story goes on. But the other really important part of the story is when Yamadeva comes to take her husband away, and she begins this dialogue with him. And what's very interesting about this dialogue is that her words are so charming, so noble, and they're philosophical. They're not like pleading words. They're words about discoursing on dharma. And Yamadeva is so charmed by this that he cannot help but say, I'm so pleased by hearing your words, say a little bit more. And then he says, but you should not follow me any further. You should not follow me any further. Go back. And she still persists in following him. And it's described how difficult it is, to make this journey, but she persists. And in the end, she is able to, in a very clever and witty way, actually obtain the boon from Yamadeva, who keeps offering her boons other than the life of her husband. And she basically says, may I have children with my husband, and he grants that. And so in an indirect way, she's gotten her life back. And this is what people say, oh, she tricked Yamadeva, it's not accurate, because actually what happens is, after that, she again asks for this, and Yamadeva says, like, yes, I know I've given this to you before, but I gladly give you Satyavan's life back. And so it's a mutual respect and admiration, and it shows how much wit and wherewithal she had in the moment that when her husband died, she's able to do this. And in the process, she not only wins her husband's life back, but she also is able to help her in-laws, her father-in-law who had lost his kingdom, and they were living in a very humble way. And then she guarantees a healthy line of succession for her own father as well. And then they come back. And in the meantime, the parents of Satyavan are waiting anxiously for their return, and all the rishis are there. And the rishis themselves are speaking so highly of Savitri, saying, she is so noble, she is so dharmic, surely she will return. And that's the level of confidence they have in her. So Savitri, who has come to mean someone who's kind of like a victim or a meek or submissive woman in the modern day, if you really go back to the original, you'll see how strong she is. She's the heroine of the story. She has so much intelligence. She has not only does she rescue her husband, she rescues both of the families, and she does this all within the construct of her choice. And so I think that's a very powerful story, and it also speaks to the need for us to go back to the original stories and not just take kind of the filter of these retellings and feminist retellings and things that skew and distort what our actual itihasa and puranas say, but to actually go back to the original. So that is one example. Another is the example of the story of Rukmini and Shri Krishna. And we all kind of know the story that Rukmini wrote a letter to Shri Krishna asking him to come and basically take her away and marry her. If in the Srimad Bhagavatam you actually read the story and the letter that she writes, it's very beautiful and moving, because in that letter she actually writes about not only why she wants to marry Sri Krishna. And she says, so many people have come to the palace and described your glories. And I think the only one who could be a match for me is you. And here are my qualities and why I would also be a good match for you. So again, having that kind of confidence and poise and self-knowledge it's a wonderful example. And then not only that, but she actually tells him, she says, if you are wondering how you will come and take me away without causing a lot of warfare and fighting, let me tell you that I will be going on this procession to the temple tomorrow, and this will be a place where there won't be so many guards. And she actually gives him like the how he can come and take her away. So again, that shows like her intelligence and her poise and her wit. So that's another example. And the other example I have in mind is the story of Satyabhama and Krishna. And this comes in the Harivamsha, in the southern recension of the Harivamsha, when there's the battle with Narakasura, and Shri Krishna is actually wounded and he's unable to fight for some time. And so Satyabhama actually picks up the weapons and begins fighting, and she actually breaks his bow, and it's she fights so valiantly that there's actually this painting I really like, which shows Shri Krishna reclining on the back of Garuda, just watching in admiration as his wife is fighting Narakasura. And then she performs so well so that Aditi comes and gives her this pearl earrings, I believe. And there's this necklace she had wanted from Sri Krishna for a long time, and he kept refusing to give it to her. But after she fights so well, he gives it to her. And so there's this moment of this kind of this tenderness and love between them that's very beautiful to see before Sri Krishna starts fighting the battle and they win. So these kinds of stories just show like the different personalities of Hindu women and Hindu heroines that we've revered for so long. And nowadays, because of all of this propaganda, we don't even understand who they really were. And we have all of these misperceptions and misconceptions. And when you go back to the original and read the stories, you get that ethos and this inspiration from women who are so powerful and dharmic and heroic in a way. So that was one thing I think was very important to bring out. Another is this idea of harmonizing between love or kama and dharma and the spiritual path. And so there's a really beautiful story from the Tripura Rahasya. And Tripura Rahasya is a very small, dense text. And when Ramana Maharishi was asked, he said this is one of his favorite tracts on Advaita. And so it's a parable that talks about moksha and Advaita in a sense, but it takes place in the construct of there's this prince Hemachuda, and there's this princess, this woman Hemaleka, who he falls in love with, and he marries her. And Hemaleka is basically, she has been adopted by a rishi, so she's very wise and enlightened from the beginning. But her prince is very infatuated with her, and he cannot understand why she is so kind of indifferent to him, or she's not as infatuated with him as he is with her. And so she begins kind of teaching him lessons about the reality of the world and what samsara is, and that you cannot find lasting happiness in samsara. And she teaches him all these things. And at first he thinks she's just very silly. She's talking like a silly wife. What could she possibly know? But then he begins to, over time, trust her, and he begins to like learn under her, and he begins to actually treat her as a respected master of enlightenment. And in the process, as a couple, they actually become closer. So she's very affectionate towards him, and then he also attains enlightenment. And then after that, she also helps bring the others in the city, in the kingdom, towards moksha, and it becomes such a place that even the parrots recite the Vedas. So this is an example where a woman is understood to be like a teacher and a guru, and the wife can have this kind of role, and ultimately the respect and reverence he has for his wife. So that's also like a very important example, and there are lots of examples like this in our history and in our texts. Another story that I talk about is the story of Kartikeya and his two wives, and and how they represent different aspects of love or of marriage. Where his with Devasena, it's kind of like an arranged marriage, and with Valli, who's in the forest, and they kind of fall in love. That's kind of like a romance, and both aspects are celebrated in him. Just like, in a sense, both the Shaiva and Vaishnava aspects of are celebrated with him, and how he brings that together. And then there's a story of Bilva Mangala Thakur, and this is a story, and the similar story is there in the case of Tulsidas, where in the beginning part of his life, he was very much infatuated with women. And in his case, he was so infatuated that it was a very stormy night. And then he actually, did all these things to get to her house, and he climbs up the roof holding the body of a snake and things like that. And when he lands in her room, she says, if only you had put this much intensity and fervor into pursuing Shri Krishna, how far you would have come. And when she does this, he realizes the mistakes of his ways, and he goes away. At a certain point after that, he again finds himself looking at a woman, a married woman, with desire, and he basically gouges his eyes out. He blinds himself. And this woman that was actually lived as a prostitute. But then Bilva Mangala Thakur, he actually became a great devotee of Shri Krishna, and he composed famous hymns that are celebrated in Vaishnavism. And he always lists her as one of her gurus. And even in ISKCON, even in Srila Prabhupada's writings, this is mentioned. So again, this is the kind of stature that was there, and this kind of sense of harmonizing between the two paths. And then the last story, which is also the last story that I have in the book, is the story of Pamati. And she was a woman. This is actually a story from history. And there was a great scholar, Vachaspati Mishra, and he was a follower of Adi Shankara, and he actually came like a few generations after him. And he wanted to write a tract on a commentary on the Brahma Sutras. And so he said he was going to devote his life to that. In the meantime, his mother had received an invitation to for a marriage proposal from Bhamati's father. And Vachaspati Mishra wrote back like, look, I'm going to spend my life basically working on this commentary. I have no interest in marriage. I have no interest in family. So this is not a good match. And then when Pamati heard this, she told her father, no, he's the only one I will marry, and I want to marry him. So they get married, and the story is told in more detail. But in short, years go by, and Vachaspati Mishra is so immersed in writing his commentary that he doesn't even realize really that his wife is there. And so one day he happens to notice like this glint of light with like her hand, where she has left this little bit of food for him. And then he's finished the commentary, and he awakes with a jerk, and he sees that every night someone has lit the lamp for him. Someone has given him, has left fresh leaves for him to write on, has given him the little bit of food that he would eat. And he thinks, who is this person, and how did she break into my home? And then he sees Bhamati and realizes that she is actually his wife. And for so many years, she has just been there caring for him. And because of that, because of her, he was actually able to finish the commentary. And tears start flowing down his cheeks. And he says, how is this possible? And why did you do this? And I've made this vow that as soon as this commentary is done, I will be taking sannyas. And what will become of you? And she says, no, this is what I wanted to do. I am happy that I was able to be here with you and to help you complete the commentary. I already know that you will be leaving, and that is okay. I will be taken care of by the same one who took care of me for so long. And he is so moved by this that he says, I may not be able to do anything for you, but let my work be known as Bhamati, and let your name be known instead of mine. And so even today, people will know the name of Bhamati and that commentary, but they won't really necessarily remember his name. And that to me again was like a very beautiful example of the story. And that leads me to, someone could ask, well, this sounds nice, but in reality, wouldn't she have preferred it if he had paid attention to her, and if he'd been a quote unquote good husband to her? Wouldn't that have made her happier? And I think one thing that is very difficult for us to understand is this notion and concept of sacrifice, because we kind of tend to think of it as a zero-sum game, that if I am sacrificing something for someone else, then I am losing and that person is winning. But they're getting something from me, and it's unfair. And that's actually not the right way of thinking about it. So traditionally in Hinduism, it is said that for a wife, she receives her own punya and papa from her karma, but then she also receives half of the punya of the husband and none of his papa. And the reason for that is because it was always understood that because of her, because of what a wife does, the husband is able to do so many things, and therefore half of that good merit comes to her, and none of the demerits. And this idea of sacrifice isn't that I give something to you and something gets taken away from me, but through that, she herself gains so much and becomes stronger, and not just gets the punya from that, but also she that is part of her dharma, that is part of her fulfillment, that is part of what leads her forward. And that this is always done by choice. If it should never be that someone is pressured to make a sacrifice or have these acts of devotion. If, for example, her father said, you must marry this man, and that is it, then this wouldn't be a story worth celebrating, because she wouldn't have had that choice. But the idea has always been that sacrifice is something that it's like an offering, and when you make that offering blesses everyone. So even in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said, from sacrifice everything comes. So there's like this cycle, and if you think about it, when we do puja and we make offerings of puja, it is not that we're giving something away. When you give that offering, it comes back to you as prasad. It comes back to you sanctified. And this is really the way and the spirit in which it should be understood. And I think nowadays this whole idea of sacrifice or devotion has become controversial, which is very unfortunate. So nowadays a lot of people will say, oh, like Karva Chauth is so patriarchal and misogynist. Why should a woman fast for her husband? And the thing is, if you want to, and you were asking this question earlier, what do we do in the modern world? I think you understand what the ideal and what the reason is for it. And then oftentimes nowadays we have, like, husbands will fast along with their wives on Karva Chauth. And I think that's like a very beautiful thing, right? So it's just, you can find a way that if you feel something is unfair or it doesn't feel equitable, then you could have like you fast together or something like that. But to really understand that these things weren't meant to deprive women or take anything away from them. It was actually understood that so much of the strength and the foundation and the bedrock of not just the family but of society comes from these ideals and honoring those. And that's kind of the ethos that you find in these stories. And so there are definitely ways that we can bring that into our lives. So I'll pause there.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. So, ma'am, we have a wonderful question over here from Vyasji. He asks that is there any correlation between love and bhakti?
Yes. So that is a very good question. So the whole idea of love, which again is an unfortunate word, is that you take your emotions, you take your feelings, and you progressively purify and spiritualize them. So the idea of bhakti is you take the love that let's say a mother has for her child, and so you have Shri Krishna as a baby, and you have this Vatsalya Bhava, or this motherly Bhava, and you transform what could be what it could become attachment when you have like a child, and you take that and then you transfer that to Ishvara. And whatever you transfer to Ishvara becomes purified, it becomes divine, and it leads you towards mukti, or towards union with Ishvara. And this is the difference, where if you follow the dharmic path, if you follow the path of grihasthashrama, where you think of your husband, or when we say that the husband, you think of him as like let's say like the pati deva. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that that person is Narayan or something like that. But the more you have that bhava, the easier it is for you to advance spiritually, because then bhakti becomes very natural. And in fact, the reason, we say like, oh, why women don't do Vedic rites or things like this or that puja. The thing is, when you live in this way, naturally a woman would just through doing her dharma for her family and for her marriage, all of these things would come naturally. So the bhava that would come from that would be bhakti, and it becomes very naturally flows in that direction. And there are different aspects of it which I cover in the book, which aren't here, which is this idea of love in separation. So actually the stories between Radha and Shri Krishna, and having the separation, or the love that the gopis had for Krishna, which is they never thought of him as Ishvara or as God or something like that, but they had this very natural, spontaneous love for him, such that there was a time when Shri Krishna had a headache. And he said the only thing that could make him feel better is the dust of the feet of someone who loves him. And when Narada Muni went to Rukmini and the other wives of Shri Krishna, and they said, how can we do that? That would be a great papa. It would be a great sin to do that. He's our husband. And so they said, we can't do that. Then we'll go to hell, because that would be so inappropriate. But then when he goes to Vrindavan and he goes to the gopis immediately collect like big mounds of the dust of their feet to give to their beloved, because they, even if we go to hell, if for a moment we're able to give respite to Shri Krishna, then that is worth it. So this is upheld as one of the highest forms of bhakti. And so what you do is you take the everyday love that we have for our family, which is, there's nothing wrong with it. It's to be honored, it's to be celebrated. And then you take that and you slowly and gradually transform that into a bhakti, into something that is spiritualizing and relates to bhakti. So all of these can be understood as steps in the path of bhakti. That's a great question.
And he asks, when did we lose this Indian notion of love?
I think it's been progressive. I think what's happened is especially with the coming of the British and colonialism, and this kind of giving up or this kind of move towards Westernization at that time, and this kind of moving away, or this dismissiveness towards the Puranas and the Itihasas as being superstition and myth and things like that. I think some of this was lost. So some of it is modern and going towards Westernization. Some of it, I think, is kind of the sense of prudishness that came from from the British times, and this kind of Victorian sensibility that really stopped us from having like a much healthier appreciation of how of how romance and sexuality and all these things function, that was dealt with in very healthy and open ways, but that through colonialism we lost a lot of that. And so I think there's that. I think there's also been an unfortunate tendency to recently to kind of associate Hinduism only with like what sadhus do or what sannyasis do, and kind of this sense of very celibate type of lifestyle, which is not the case. So like our rishis, for example, for the most part were married. They had families, and so there was always this very natural harmony and balance that didn't require you to become to renounce the world in order to pursue moksha and dharma. So there's kind of a confusion about these very fundamental notions. And so some of it, I think a lot of it has come through colonialism, the destruction of our traditional educational institutions, losing touch with like the stories our grandparents would tell us, and all these things were very natural to us. And now we have to, do it intentionally to learn our own heritage and learn our own stories. So I think that's the unfortunate part. And nowadays, again, it's so much this onslaught of the West, where you get conditioned very, very, very easily. So one example of this is I was talking to there's an author who writes Bengali American fiction, and she was writing a story about a young girl, an Indian American girl in New Jersey, and she comes home and she runs up the stairs with her sneakers on. And then this writer was saying, she paused at that moment because she thought, this would never happen. You would never wear shoes inside the house in our culture. So why am I writing this? And it's because we read so many dozens of stories about like Harry Potter or this and that, and then we start thinking like that, and we start imagining ourselves like that. And so very simple things we get conditioned on. And because we're just surrounded by these kinds of stories, not just in English, but like Bollywood takes the same template, and this kind of very westernized view of the world, it alienates us. It makes us think this is the way love is. This is what love means. Because if I actually just say to you the word love or a love story, what'll come to your mind isn't the stories from Puranas. It'll be, the latest romantic comedy on the TV or fairy tales or something like that. And that's how deep the conditioning has gone in. And so we have to be very deliberate and intentional in deconditioning ourselves and learning to think about things in a different perspective that is ultimately much, much, much healthier and sustainable.
Right. Thank you. We have one more question from Sanhita ji in the chat box. She asked, how much importance was given to the physical beauty back then when we talk about women?
And so it's the physical beauty was understood in a different way in traditional Hinduism, which is, it's not about like physical features or things like that. But one thing that was understood is if you can look at someone's face and you can see like their tejas, right? So oftentimes you'll say someone has like a very clean face. It's not about their physical features. It's about your sadhana and your character. And actually it's said even, I think it's like after the age of 20 or after the age of 40, like your character is written on your face. So it's that kind of sense where it's not like a physical in terms of like your physiognomy or your features or your bone structure or something very superficial. But you look at a person and they have like they have an aura or something like that. And in the olden days, when you looked at someone, and even when you described their beauty, it wasn't in the superficial senses, is taking all of it in, like they're and you can see that on their face. Part of it is that you describe physical beauty because part of the Itihas and the Purana is about glorifying. So if you're talking about, for example, our Devatas or Devi, then these are figures that we revere and worship. And the physical form is actually very important, because when you do upasana on that form, the qualities and the lakshanas of that Devata or that Devi will manifest within you. And so when you're describing those physical aspects, it's not at a superficial level. It's actually a very deep sense of concretizing certain qualities and values and ideals. And through this upasana, this physical manifestation, you actually get the spiritual essence behind that. And then part of those passages are really just about, kind of like almost like a glorification, or this person was so beautiful, she looked like this and that. And part of it is just a healthy appreciation for beauty in an aesthetic sense. So it wasn't like something where it was superficial, or it was based on lust or something like that. It had a much deeper, richer, nuanced understanding behind it. And also it's important to understand, when we're talking about beauty, a lot of times beautiful women were described as being dusky and dark in complexion. So it wasn't the sense of you had to be very fair and white or something like that. So there were different forms that it took. And so, for example, even if you think of someone like Devi and the forms that she takes, which range from like Gauri to Makali and all of that, just celebrating that entire spectrum of feminine beauty and Shakti and force that manifests in different ways. So that's how I would think about it.
Right. Okay. So over here we have two questions clubbed into one, and I guess this question is so interesting that even I would love to know about it. It's about, how would you define the love between Dashrath and Kaikai, and the love between Hidimba and Bhim?
Oh, that's interesting. So I would say Dashrath and Kaikai, first of all, one thing to be understood about Kaikai is that she was, for most of her life, she was actually a very noble, strong, like very wonderful woman. So she had fought in the battlefield, and she'd rescued Dashrath, which is how she'd gotten this boon. She was also very loving towards Sri Rama when he was a child, up until the time of his coronation. She was very affectionate towards him. She loved him a lot. It was the influence, and so she was also the favorite of Dasharath. And so then there's the influence of others, and it triggered her insecurities and worries, and then things took a negative turn. But before that, she's actually a very very positive character in that sense. But what the Ramayana tells us is so the bond between her and Dashrath was natural, and it was nice. But even before there are in the Ramayana, it talks about even before the banishment of Sri Rama. So for example, Kaushalya talks about being for a very long time neglected. So Dashrath was so much doting on Kaikai that he neglected Kaushalya and his other wives. And that is indicated as being, that's not appropriate. That shouldn't have happened, because because he should have had, as their husband, he should have been attentive to each of them, even if he had like a preference for one. So there are those signs in there that his attachment to Kaikai went beyond kind of like a dharmic love to somewhat like an unhealthy infatuation and obsession, where he was actually neglecting his dharma and his duties to his other wives, for her sake. And that kind of gives you an indication of like what were all the different factors that went into what happened with Kaike, and maybe because her ego became very affected by that, and all these influences were there, and why she took this negative turn ultimately. Oh, and then the love between Hidimba and Pino. So that is actually one of my favorite stories, and I think it's a very beautiful story because their time together is so short, but still she is so you can feel this very natural bond between them, and they're caring for each other, and then Katotkacha comes out of that, and she says, your son will be there when you need him, and he becomes such a great hero, even though he's hardly spent more than a little bit of, he's hardly spent time with his father, but he becomes this great hero for the Pandavas. And so their story is actually, in a way, very like celebrated, because even though she's like a Rakshasi, and she has, she's not obviously like what would be like a typical queen, but Kunti gives her blessing to them. They have this happy time together. Her son becomes this great hero. And even now, if you go, there's a wonderful Hidimba temple outside Manali that's very popular. So there's this. I think it's a wonderful story, and she's a wonderful figure, and their love story is something that's very popular, and I think revered, even today. And you can see that difference where that's like a dharmic love, because he cannot stay with her because they, the Pandavas have their journey to go on, and she selflessly gives, she accepts that, and she gives her son to him, that he will appear when he needs him, when he needs him. And so that's something, again, within the framework of dharma, which is very different from what ultimately happens between Dashratha and Kaikeyi.
And it was such an enlightening session. We got to know lot many things about different aspects of love. The very first was that we did not have the notion of having expectations. There was no give and take. Like, if you do something for me, then I'll do something for you. It was done selflessly. And I guess today, if this aspects comes into picture, things will get much better today. So thank you so much for revealing this particular aspect that was there in our Indian thought process. Second thing about Dharma, what you said, I think you very correctly said that Dharma could not be found in one particular aspect of life. It is there everywhere. Sanatan Dharma is all about Dharma. It is a way of living, and therefore it is everywhere. And the third point which you made about women, that how beautiful they were, not just physically, but through their grit and determination. They played lot of roles in the society back then. So thank you so much for showing how wonderful women were out there. And I guess today, if women understand what substance they have inside them, we will be able to create a better place with more confidence. And I guess because it makes us understand, I guess in the Indian thought, women knew that they are the center, and around them everything revolved. Right. So there was no question about equality. There was no fight about it. But today, because somewhere there is disbalance, therefore this fight has begun that we want to be equal to men. But back then, this notion was just not there.
Yes. And I think what you said, it can't be transactional, because anytime it's transactional, you will be bound to become selfish. If you're keeping count in your head, what have I done for you and what have you done for me, you'll always want to do less. And what our the Hindu perspective is like when you think of it as an offering, right? When you say like, if I want to make an offering to the best of your extent, to the best of your ability, right? And so
Yes.
you look not what is that person doing for me, but today, what is within me that I can offer? And maybe I can't offer so much today because there's just too much pressure on me. So that's okay. But when it becomes something that's internal, then you're not dependent on someone else for your happiness. It's all coming from within. And as long as you feel like I've done the best of my ability that I can for, for that, that gives a different type of contentment. So it's really something where you're looking within to see how much can I offer to my loved one, to my family. And the more if everyone acts like that, then it's a very beautiful harmony, and you don't have this kind of negotiation, or almost this antagonism of what are you doing for me versus what am I doing for you.